It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you?
Glad to be back.
Glad to see you. Glad to see you as well, Alicia Rubin, New York Times bureau chief.
Hello.
Nice to see you on a Friday.
On a Friday.
All right.
Amazing.
Elaine Cobb, Paris correspondent for CBS News. Nice to see you.
Hi.
And Franco-Syrian photojournalist al-Abadi, who's reporting on the war in Aleppo. You can see in his latest book, Alep, A-L-E-P is the name of the book, right? Thanks for being with us. The World This Week on Facebook and on Twitter. You can follow or join in the conversation. Hashtag World This Week. London is open. That was the hashtag that went viral the morning after the UK's worst terror attack since the London transport bombings of 2005. Less than 24 hours later, Westminster Bridge was reopened and Parliament was in session. Parliament where the assailant was gunned down after taking the lives of 4, including an officer at the entrance. The fact that London was open, Christopher Dickey, is that just a sign of the sort of the British phlegm, or is it that we've just gotten used to this drill now?
I don't think it's quite either one. I mean, I think that the British were very much the sort of keep calm and carry on mentality. But we saw something very similar to that after November 13th here in Paris. People were in the cafes very quickly. Yeah,
not the next day.
Well, pretty
it took
quickly.
2 or 3 days to.
Well, I don't know. You went to different cafes than me, and but they came back very quickly. And I think actually, if we were in London, we'd say yes, things are coming back. But people do look over their shoulder a little bit. These kinds of terrorist attacks can happen almost any time, anywhere. That's the whole point of them. But the idea that was being put forth on Fox News, for instance, by Nigel Farage and other people who were close to Donald Trump, that everybody was terrified and that everything had ground to a halt, that was just absolutely false.
Is this the new normal, Elisa Rubin?
I think in Europe it more and more is. There have been so many attacks by now, and in some ways, certainly here in France, I felt it didn't get a whole lot of attention at the time it happened, of course, but the television moved on quite quickly, and by the next day we were, there were news bulletins on what was happening, but it was back to sort of normal news. And I think partly that was the scale of the attacks. Partly it was that it didn't happen here in France again. I think if it had, there would have been much more upset. But I think people have factored it in.
I think there's quite a lot of grappling when it comes to the coverage, al-Abadi, because it's a question of how much do you cover, how do you cover, especially in those initial hours when we don't really know much.
Exactly. I mean, we saw it the next day with something happening in Antwerp, in Belgium. That was much more like a drink and drive catastrophe, but not really much related to terrorism. But there was a few hours of questioning. But I would not compare it exactly. I mean, with what happened in London, of course, is horrible, but I wouldn't compare it with Paris attacks. I mean, in one case,
the Paris attacks
you
were
have
much
15
bigger, they were much worse.
Or 20 armed guys, very organized, 3 or 4 teams, etc.
But I'm not saying the attacks were the same. I'm saying that the response of the people here...
but the response cannot be the same if the attacks are not the same.
Well, that's because you're still underselling the French response. I think that the French have been very resilient. The French, God knows, the French have a lot of experience with terrorism. You can go back, I have a picture of me when I was 10 years old on the Eiffel Tower next to a guy, a policeman in a kepi and a cape carrying a machine gun. Why? Because of the OIS, the Algerian terrorism that was going on. So, France has a lot of experience with terrorism. Europe has a lot of experience with terrorism, with the IRA, for instance, in Great Britain. I think people are more resilient here than in the United States, where essentially people felt like they were virgins until 9/11. They felt untouched by international terrorism. It's very different now in the United States, but I don't know if Americans would be as resilient as this.
It's been 12 years since there were those major attacks on London transport, which killed a lot more people. What struck you when you looked at what happened on Wednesday, Link?
I think it was first that they actually hit at Westminster. That was chosen surely for 2 reasons. There are always so many people there, Londoners, tourists, politicians, and also it's the seat of power and it is the most heavily guarded part of the British capital. And yet somebody managed to get through the gates. How well planned it was, we don't really know. But during a vote, those gates are open most of the time. so that the ministerial cars can just go in, so that it's not as usual where the gates are closed. And the assailant got right inside. And the fact that he could hit at the heart of British power is not just, the practical effect of what happened, but it's symbolic. And sure, there were fewer victims in the end, but the symbolism is quite big. And it's something like when the IRA hit at the gardens of Downing Street, it's to say, we can get to the heart of your power.
So here's the dilemma. What do? Do you then permanently shut down the centre of London?
Well, no, and they've said we're not going to, because in a democracy, the ministerial staff, the MPs are all available to the public, and it has to stay that way. It's also, let's face it, one of the major tourism draws for England, and so they can't just shut it down. It's the same dilemma here in Paris. Tourism was badly hit after the series of attacks. And, it's a question that all the security experts and the governments are grappling with. Just how far do you go to secure our nations while not wrecking normal life? And it's too easy to say, slap down lots more security. But if it's just to, stop people going about their daily business, or to deny them civil rights, is it worth it?
Well, if there's anything we learned from the Nice attack last July or this one, it's to be careful about wide sidewalks. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but if you can drive a car on a sidewalk, well, that's not a good idea. So I suspect we will see bollards, obstructions, put on wide sidewalks like the ones on Westminster Bridge or the Promenade des Anglais in Nice.
Mayor Hidalgo is widening the sidewalks in Paris all over the place.
That's probably a mistake.
Also, the idea that the more we give up, the more we close spaces, the more we give up freedom, and the more we are actually playing exactly what is expected from those who attack us.
Sure.
So we have always to be careful about this. It's not just a matter of security, it's also what's behind.
One of the most unusual aspects of all this is the age of the assailant, 52 years old. Christopher Dickey, I don't recall seeing an assailant of that age to now.
No, that's old for an assailant. Although he's a convert to Islam. I think he's been trying to find himself for a long time. And I also remember that the guy who attacked Orly Airport just last Saturday was 39 years old. So it's not people who are young don't have an absolute monopoly on it. They're a majority of the terrorists, but they're not. It's not exclusively them.
And I think also that you see people who do also have serious mental health problems, who are drawn to radicalism. That's not to excuse them, but often they are older, it seems, as opposed to being younger people who are sort of part of a more gang mentality, who perhaps went to Syria or they know someone who did and then get sucked in. These seem to be somewhat more isolated individuals.
I mean, the guy who attacked Orly, what a loser. I mean, he'd been in jail, he'd gotten out of jail, he was stoned on alcohol, cocaine, and marijuana, gets stopped at a traffic stop and shoots a cop with a pellet gun.
Right.
And then says to his father, I screwed up. No kidding. And so he wants to go out in a blaze of glory, and he goes to Orly Airport and tries to do something and gets himself killed.
And just one final thing on this. Once again, we had the initial reports from authorities talking about a lone wolf. And this Friday, they're talking about significant arrests regarding this case.
Well, we'll see how long they hold those people. Look, there's sort of three different categories. There's the concerted attack by people who are trained to do this sort of things, like the Paris attacks November 13th. Then there is the non-lone wolf, the directed single agent, one or two people. We saw last summer with the attack on the two police, the husband and wife police, and with the cutting of the throat of the priest. They were managed over Telegram, over an encrypted messaging service from Syria. And then you have guys like the guy at Orly, apparently, possibly like this guy, who just get it in their head that they're going to do something. Also, by the way, Nice, it looks very much like the guy in Nice, was not directed from outside. And he killed 86 people.
One of the big questions now is what about all the European nationals who are coming back as ISIS suffers on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria? The French defense minister says now we're days away from the offensive to retake the self-styled capital of Raqqa in Syria. We'll have more on him later, but it's clear that Islamic State militants are on the back foot, both in Syria and Iraq. Iraq, whose prime minister, by the way, got the red carpet treatment at the White House this week. Haider al-Abadi, who's thankful for the U.S. troop buildup in the fight to retake the country's second city, Mosul, and for having his nation taken off Donald Trump's travel ban list. Reporters asked him if Trump was more forceful in combating terrorism than his predecessor.
Did you get the sense that this administration has an anti-ISIS strategy that's different from the previous administration? And if so, how?
I think this administration wants to be more engaged in fighting terrorism. And I can sense a difference in terms of being head-to-head with terrorism. I think they're prepared to do more to fight terrorism, to be more engaged.
Elisa Rubin, your thoughts on this? Because it's something that startled people at the Arab language channel here at France 24.
Well, I feel like the whole sequence of events was pretty startling. I mean, first Iraq, which we've been fighting side by side with for years, was all of its nationals were going to be excluded. People who had saved lives, interpreters, were not being allowed in. And really, in a very short time, a lot of people spoke to the president, President Trump, and said, look, this just doesn't work because we need them if we're going to do anything in Iraq. And so then there was this reversal where suddenly Abadi is at the White House. I mean, it seemed extraordinary to me. And now I think he wants to be very careful not to offend the Americans because he does need them. And he has about the hardest balancing act of any leader because he has to, on the one hand, stay quite close to Iran, which is very, very involved in Iraq. It has generals, soldiers, both more informal ones as well as formal ones there. But it needs the United States too, because it just isn't going to be able to do it alone.
Pundits in Saudi Arabia are describing this visit as a victory over Iran.
Well, I wouldn't declare victory over Iran very quickly. I think the Iranians are the ones on the ground in very large numbers, and the Americans are not right now. And if indeed Donald Trump wants to engage more, he also has to risk all the criticisms that we've run into in the past when we've gotten involved.
Is it factually correct that the Trump administration is more engaged in fighting terrorism than the Obama administration was?
I don't think we've seen their plan yet in any detail, so I certainly wouldn't go that far. I mean, Trump has very bellicose rhetoric, but whether that will translate into action or money for guns or renewed training or any of the other things that Iraq is looking for, I think is going to be much more up to General Mattis, who is running the Defense Department.
Amr Abed-Rabah, what does this tell you, this visit?
Well, I'm like Elisa. It's very foggy yet. I mean, the Trump external policy. I mean, we still really don't know. I've read that maybe some plans are in the Pentagon to send many men to Syria to fight Daesh. This would be really a huge change from Obama's era. But as we say, I mean, it's probably the first time in ages that we have a president of the United States of America and we have no clue about his foreign policy.
Well, I mean, I'm watching al-Abadi and I'm thinking it was like watching Merkel, too. It's like watching everybody who meets with Trump. They come away and they're talking to the press and they're trying to be very diplomatic. But you can see in their eyes that they're coming out of these conversations thinking, this guy doesn't have any idea what's going on. I didn't understand a damn thing he said. What was he telling me? This problem is huge.
Amazing.
Amazing. What was he saying? I'm going to fight terrorism. That's what al-Abadi was going to say. That's all he was saying. Trump kept telling him, I'm going to be tough on terrorism. I'm really going to be hard on it. Do we think he made any commitments in terms of, for instance, on the Syrian side of the war? Is he going to create safe zones? There's talk about that. Are we going to have troops that will then go in and protect those safe zones? How's all that going to work? Whenever these people talk to Trump about how is it going to work, He can't tell them because he just doesn't know.
We've heard in the last hours that the U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is going to go to Turkey before a NATO summit next week. How's that all going to factor in? Because it does sound like we are on the eve of something when it comes to the offensive to retake Raqqa.
Well, yeah, but who's going to do it? I mean, the Americans have been betting on the Kurds to take the offensive against Raqqa. Erdogan says, no, it can't be the Kurds, it's going to be us, except he's never shown any commitment to do anything like this. At the same, I mean, Erdogan's a hugely the president of Turkey is a hugely complicated case for Washington. I mean, as I wrote recently, I mean, Turkey is our most dangerous ally in the United States. It's becoming a base for ISIS. It didn't move against ISIS for several years, and now it's just playing this game. What's it going to do with Raqqa? Mainly screw the Kurds.
When we come back, we're going to look at Donald Trump's issues domestically. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.